further ado, I think it's time for us to get started. So if everyone's ready, welcome everyone to the amazing event that we have today. The title, The Politics of Labels, Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, and what else? The View from the Heartland. We want to make sure that everyone here is at the right event and we're ready to start. And as we go forward, I want to have a couple of important mentions before anything else. Number one, welcome everyone to the McLean County Museum of History. Welcome to our event. And of course, I want to thank you the amazing space that we have, and also one of our sponsors, WGLT, the radio station that's helping us today to get this event going alongside all the universities working together to bring this amazing panel of people that we have here today. After that, I want to mention that we're going to be streaming live the event, so just be mindful of that. As we go into further on a question session, I will be repeating each question on the microphone just for the live streaming so that we make sure that we get all the feedback correct. Everything good so far? Thank you. Well, my name is Raylene Gómez Hernandez. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I am the Assistant Director for Diversity and Inclusion at Illinois Wesleyan University, and I am here as your facilitator for this amazing panel that we have here today for the event. Welcome, everyone. Now, thank you. I also want to remind everyone that all the events that we are going to be, all the things we're going to be talking about in today's event is the beginning of a series of different opportunities that we're offering through the McLean County Museum of History and also through Illinois State University to celebrate Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month. So please be mindful of that. We're going to be talking about some of those opportunities later on in the event. But for right now, I want to pass the microphone so we can have our panelists introduce themselves and we can go from there.
My name is José Manuel Patiño Díaz. I was born in Maracay, Venezuela. I am a senior in Normal Community High School. I'm 17 years old, and I've lived here for about 8 years.
Hello, my name is Mario Jasso. I've lived here my whole life. I'm a student at ISU. I am a junior, and I'm a student worker.
Hi, my name is Sonny García. I'm a retired civil servant who worked 30 years at Illinois State University, also an activist, artist, and poet. I've lived here my entire life, so I'm a townie.
Hi, my name is Nicte, Rivadeneyra-Braswell. I've also lived here my entire life. I attend ISU I'm a sophomore geology major.
Hi, my name is Micaela Harris. I will self-identify as a townie as well. I have the pleasure of working here at the McLean County Museum of History, and I'm honored to be here with you all tonight.
Thank you very much for the introductions. So now for the event, what we're going to do, we're going to engage in a conversation when each of our panelists are going to present about what identity labels kind of mean for them and how they engage with them. They prepare a series of questions that they can answer in terms of this topic. And just a reminder that this conversation is also engaging with last year's panel about the same topic. How do we deal with all the labels imposed in the community or the ones that we have acquired throughout history, culturally, and socially? So, without further ado, I'm going to pass it to the panelists. You can use any of the two microphones. Please start talking about your identities and labels and some of the questions we prepared for today. Anyone can take the mic right away. Oh, don't be afraid of it. Come on. We can do that. Would you like to start?
So, as I said, my name is Micaela. I've grown up here. When Maura first invited me to be on this panel, I thought, I don't know if I'm the best person to really speak to this. But she convinced me that third generation is a worthy story to tell. I have the Latina in me comes from my maternal grandfather, who was a first generation. Both of his parents came from Mexico to work. So my great-grandmother was a migrant worker starting in Mississippi and moving all the way up to Michigan, working in the sugar beet fields, and eventually settled and made her home in Chicago with my great-grandfather, who similarly, he was a bracero who came from Mexico in the 1920s, early 1930s. My grandfather, like I said, was then first generation. He grew up in Chicago, did a lot of factory work, and eventually enlisted in the Navy. After that, he went to the University of Illinois, where he met my very white grandmother, and they fell in love and got married, and he settled in central Illinois. They first were in the Peoria area in a small town called Brimfield, and then moved to Pawnee, which is south of Springfield, has less than 1,000 people, and that cultural element that he had when he grew up in Chicago. He lived in Pilsen in what is now a multi-million-dollar condo, and was not then, but is now. And because of that, there was a lot of assimilation. So even though my grandfather, they quickly picked up, he was a PE teacher by trade, but then they were like, hey, he could teach Spanish too. So he taught Spanish to kids and then began working with migrant children. But they never really spoke Spanish in the home. So that's something that my mother, she would call herself a bad Mexican. That's a lot to unpack in and of itself. But that's kind of that piece of it for me. So I don't really identify in any particular way with Latino or Chicana, Hispanic, Mexican. A lot of it is boxes to fill out on paper. If I have to choose, I'll check white and Hispanic and move on with my day. But what does stick with me are some of the lessons from my grandfather and the work that he did. After working with migrant children, he went on to become the director of the Illinois Migrant Association and dedicated a lot of his life to education for migrants, and did some work with Cesar Chavez. And yeah, so that's kind of, those values that's what the identity is to me. If I'm talking to people, I usually like to use Latinx. We like to use Latinx at the museum just because it is more inclusive. But I know that, like, if I'm talking to Maura, she is a proud Latina, so I think it's less about the label and more about the person.
Thank you, Micaela. Nicte?
Hi. So, like I said, I've lived in Bloomington my whole life, but my family, I have my parents over there. My mother is second-generation Mexican-American. She grew up in Southern California, Long Beach, California, and Spanish was her first language, but I can only speak a little bit of it. I took Spanish a bunch in high school, and I try to speak it a lot with relatives, but it's like not really stuck that well. But I try using it as much as I can in my day-to-day life. And then my dad grew up in Chicago, so they're both from big cities, and then moved to Bloomington because they both got offered jobs at ISU, and then to raise a family. I have two little siblings, they're still in high school. Let's see. And then my mother's parents, my abuelitos, they both immigrated to the US when they were young, and they still live in California, so we try to visit them as often as we can. For my own personal identity, I think I prefer the term Latine mostly over Latinx. I'm okay with Latina or Latino. I identify as mixed race because I feel like there's a lot in there to unpack that I feel like it's easier telling people that I'm just mixed race, so that's usually what I go with. I do have a sort of like complicated concept of my racial identity, I guess, and this is sort of parallel. I'm also queer, and that's another part of my identity that's kind of complex, so I just use queer instead of more specific labels because I think it fits better as like an overarching term. Let's see, how much of this did you want me to go through?
You can talk about for a couple more minutes if you want.
Okay. Growing up in Bloomington has been, I mean, it's not that small of a town, but it's certainly a lot wider than the towns that my parents grew up in. It is. But there is still a strong community here, even though it's smaller than where my parents grew up. So there's a little bit of a feeling of isolation, but I still have, like growing up, I still had some friends. And obviously my family means a lot to me. So that's good. There's a little bit of complexity in there, not knowing where I belong because I'm mixed race. That becomes a little complicated, but I think I've happily found my place here. And then another thing, also my name is It's kind of a long name, and a lot of people, especially teachers, don't seem to have the patience for it, and some people say it's like complicated, but I like that it's complicated. I think my name is like a really important part of who I am, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Nicte. Sonny?
So, like I said, I was born and raised here, born in 1971, so that makes me 52 years old. My mother came from South Texas. She was also a migrant worker, worked all around the country, really, but ended up here because her brother started working here as a construction worker in the mid-'60s, and they first came up here, they lived in Chicago, then they settled here. But her and her best friend, Sarita Mendiola, who is like a surrogate mother to me because, you know, she helped raise me, but they were best friends and they would go to Chicago every weekend for the dances. And that's where she met my undocumented father. And fell in love, got married, had me, divorced, and I never saw him again. But so I was raised by a single mother, really strong work ethics, functionally illiterate, but I don't know how she did it, but she managed to drive all over the country not being able to read, and I get lost using a GPS, especially in Lower Wacker. Don't go down there. But yeah, so she raised me, like had a lot of surrogate mothers. I had a tia for like a summer or I think a year. I went down to South Texas and was raised for like my first year with my tia Nena. So I used to call myself Sonny Vargas as a little kid, even though my name is Sonny Garcia. But, you know, my father, undocumented, you know, just, it didn't work and he split. I don't hold it against him. I know the struggle it is to be undocumented in America. And, you know, it is what it is. I have no regrets. I have no ill will towards him. I love him, and, you know, hopefully he had a good life and everything worked out great for him. But he is from Nayarit, Mexico. That's where he's from. And so I've always identified as, I guess I've worked the spectrum. I mean, when I was a kid, I would just say I'm Mexican, went to Mexican America and Chicano, started getting a little more conscious of like our native roots, and, you know, learned about the Mexica movement, and so I call myself Mexica. I've got tattoos of all this stuff. I got Chicano power and Mexica and La Raza all right here because, you know, I don't know where I'm coming from, but I've always kind of, you know, identified as indigenous. I mean, I just felt it in my soul. I mean, and people would always ask me, are you native? I mean, everywhere I went, are you native? And I'd be like, yeah, that's what I am. Because, you know, for me, the Latino community or demographic, or I can't find the right word, but, you know, we're indigenous to the Americas. So even if you were born in North America, South America, Central America, we're indigenous. So that's kind of how I started to identify. A couple of years ago, my partner, who's really into genealogy, she paid for a Christmas present one of those DNA kind of tests that you do online. So I can't remember which one it was, but it came back 100% Mesoamerican, specifically from the area where my father is from Nayarit, Mexico. So since then, I've just like full-fledged, boom, I'm Mesoamerican. That's what I identify as, so deal with it. But yeah, so, and that's why that informs my choices. My choices have always kind of been kind of like spiritually inclined, wanting to work with the planet, helping other folks just because of, you know, as a single mother, we were poor. I mean, we were on like public assistance for many years, but her work experience, you know, she was a feminist before. She didn't even know what a feminist was, but she was a feminist, and she stood up for women's rights, and she didn't take any crap from any man, including my father. But, you know, so, you know, I grew up in that atmosphere, so I always saw like strong, feminine, independent women as something that was love, it was my mother. So, I mean, everything in my entire life is because of her. But, you know, she established, you know, a hardcore work ethic and pride in, you know, who I am as a Latino in this community. She talked about working in the fields with, you know, when the organizing was happening with Cesar Chavez, and just, she was a union worker in the 80s and got locked out by Reaganomics, and, you know, after that is when we were on public assistance. Years later, she got another union job at Illinois State University as a building service worker. So there's always that strong labor union kind of like value that she has instilled in me, and I've like spent the rest of my life fighting for the rights of the underrepresented, the disenfranchised, the discriminated against. It doesn't matter if you're Black, Latino, gay, trans. One of my favorite songs from Rage Against the Machine, and I think it's a Bruce Springsteen song called The Ghost of Tom Joad. It's like my theme song. It's like, wherever you see a cop beat the guy, wherever you see a hungry newborn baby cry, wherever there's anger in the streets and blood in the air, look in their eyeball, because I'll be there. And that's kind of like how I've lived my whole life, which kind of put me in the activist, kind of like, I became an activist. That's what I was. For a long time, I organized the Latino community here in Bloomington Normal, across the state, worked on local, state, federal campaigns, got into electoral organizing, you know, was one of the main founders of Black Lives Matter Bloomington Normal, helped a Democratic Socialists of America organization thrive in this community, started an electoral campaign where we were electing progressive candidates who stood with my values, and at least the values that I supported, and we kind of made a splash in this community. And there's still like the repercussions of that happening currently with just a lot of people that came up along the way over the last 20 years of me organizing in this community. But that was also fueled by, you know, some of the stories growing up. So in the 70s, there wasn't a lot of us here. There was a handful of Latino families. I remember going to school and being the only brown kid. I was called racial terms by the people in my life who were supposed to be mentors, teachers, and people that were there to take care of me. Specifically, a football coach that I had was using, you know, racial terms against me. I would go to my friend's house. Their parents would say racially insensitive jokes. I mean, which led to a lot of kind of like confusion. I mean, I had abandonment issues and a lot of self-hatred that's coming from the hate that's, you know, around me. But at the same time, still having that drive for my mother to be proud of myself and like overcome, and watching her overcome her obstacles. I mean, there's nothing I could complain about. I was 100% blessed growing up in this community. I would have never picked anywhere else to live, because Bloomington Normal, McLean County made me who I am today, and it gave me the opportunities that I was able to overcome. And, you know, I'm blessed. I'm like so grateful for everything I have. Like I said, I'm retired. I'm like an artist that just living the artist lifestyle. You know, I have a humble pension, but it's enough to live off of, and it's enough for me to live the lifestyle that I want. And I'm happier now than I've ever been my entire life. Let's see what else. Yeah, so Bloomington Normal's great, and thanks.
Thank you, Sonny. Mario?
Good evening. My name is Mario again. So I've lived here my whole life. My mom is from California. She came here when she was 13 years old, and my dad is from Zacatecas, Mexico. He moved here before he finished middle school. A couple years after that, I was born in 2003. My mom had me when she was 15. So yeah, and Bloomington, again, made me who I am today. I was lucky enough to go to Penn Elementary School, which is one of the only schools that have like a bilingual program. So 1st through 5th grade, I had all my classes in Spanish, and I was able to learn everything. There's also programs because I had speech problems. So I was able to get my help there, but I was also able to keep my culture and, you know, just help me become who I am today. for the longest time, I've always seen myself as Mexican. But as I've gotten older, I've been exploring such as Hispano, Chicano, and Latinx. And so it's been a journey, and I'm lucky that I was, I guess, raised in this town where I had a bunch of support to help me through it. There's been scary moments during this, during some like periods of time because I was scared. I've always felt kind of alone. I kind of always fell in the middle. Of course, I had, my Hispano friends, but I also had my white friends. I was never in one group. I was always in between. And so it was kind of hard, especially keeping those friendships over time. But I don't know, I'm nervous. I don't know. So yeah.
Thank you, Mario. And finally, but not least, Jose.
Yeah, so my name is José. I was originally, as I said before, I was originally born in Venezuela. Both of my parents are from Venezuela. And so we first moved here in 2009. They wanted to come here because they wanted to study at ISU. And we had to, unfortunately, go back to Venezuela. I mean, not unfortunately, but we had to go back to Venezuela in 2010 because their student visas got revoked or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but we had to go back anyways. So then for the next 5 years, I got to sort of grow up in Venezuela, and I got to meet most of my family, and I'm thankful that I was able to at least meet a few of them. Or like a large majority of my, my cousins and my uncles and aunts and stuff like that. But unfortunately, due to the deterioration of Venezuela in around 2014, 2015, my parents felt forced to leave the country because they did not feel like we would have had, me and my brother would not have the best future possible in Venezuela. So they made one of the toughest decisions any parent can make, leaving most of our stuff, our friends, our family, and very much knowing that we could potentially never see them again. And we came here, looking for the American dream. So I'm truly thankful that they did that. Living here in central Illinois has been moving from a suburb of the largest city in Venezuela to Bloomington is, it's a bit of a culture shock. But I feel like in some cases I fit in like a glove here. I've made lots of friends, I've met lots of fantastic people of all races. I have friends that are originally that have heritage from India, some people that are American, others that are Latino. I still gotta stick to my roots and practice my Spanish. So I tend to identify as Latino, Hispanic, and most of all Venezuelan because I was still born there, and both of my parents are from there. So, in terms of the community, Blono growing up here, I've gotten to meet a lot of, fantastic people, and the Hispanic/Latino community here is very strong, and it's of a lot of backgrounds. Specifically, the Venezuelan community here is I feel like it's very welcoming. I've gotten to know a lot of people from there. I feel like the person that ties us all together is Marinelli Castillo, who is definitely a very key part of that community. She's a teacher at ISU. She's also one of the coordinators for the Spanish club in ISU. So she's been incredibly important in keeping this tight-knit community together. Some difficulties that I've had here, definitely the language barrier. Having to learn English is not it's not easy, you know, when you're you know, fresh out of a different country, and you know, the first people you see at summer camp is this white lady asking you, what grade are you in? And you're just like, and you know, not understanding. But I think I've come a long way. The fact that I'm even here right now, giving this, talking to everyone here in English with minimal issues is truly a testament to how far I've come in my journey here. In terms of isolation, you know, not seeing my family is it kind of sucks. It's not great. A lot of them have unfortunately passed without me getting another chance to see them. And, you know, retaining those kinds of connections when you're so far away is so difficult. But throughout the years, I've been able to reconnect with for example, some of my peers from my elementary school, my elementary third grade class from before I moved. And I've also, you know, been in contact with some of my family members, and that kind of stuff helps, you know, when you feel like you're a small fish in a large ocean here in the United States. I feel like this is a bit of a personal experience, but one of my triumphs that I feel like is kind of symbolic of how far I've come is I volunteered at the normal public library, and while there, I was basically just tasked with helping whatever event was going on, and they gave me a little pin that said in Spanish, it said, "Hi, I speak Spanish," and I've kept that pin because it truly symbolizes how far I've come in my journey here. You know, the fact that I'm trusted enough in terms of, you know, as a person, and in terms of how fluent I am, that I could help people out in this community, specifically you know, Hispanics and Latinos. And you know, that's what I want to do in the future. I want to be a person that truly has an impact in the community. Not only the Hispanic community, but any community. That's why I want to go into education. I want to be a teacher. That's why I also want to go to ISU. I've always felt that, you know, being bilingual is a bit of a superpower, you know, because it opens up so many doors. You can you know, communicate with so many more people, and you know, learning a third language isn't bad either. But yeah, I feel like for growing up here, I just want to make an impact in the community. So that's why I want to go into education. So yeah.
Thank you, José. I feel like at this moment we need to like all take one little breath and appreciate the diversity and the richness of the stories that have been shared with us. You know, we have panelists from all different kinds of backgrounds, perspective, points of view, and they're here sharing their stories with us, and that's a very beautiful opportunity. So let's just all take one moment to appreciate that, because I feel very honored to be here listening to your stories. So thank you very much to all of you. As we move forward, this next section is for all of you guys in the audience to ask questions. So I will please encourage you guys to say a question out loud. I will repeat it on the microphone, and then we can go from there so our panelists can share more of their amazing information, knowledge, and experience. Whoever would like to go? Just to... Sorry, can you say that again? Okay. Just to repeat the question from the audience is, what does it mean to be Chicano to Sonny?
To me, that it was just always like the Mexican American. It was like the cholos in LA who kind of like started that kind of like the lowrider culture, and there was cholos in South Texas when my mom was growing up in the 50s too. So yeah, it was Chicano. I mean, that's like actually one of the first images I remember as like a 5 or 6 year old. She had this. It was a Chicano power fist. She drew it. I mean, because my mom was also not only just amazing navigator, she's also an artist, and very crafty woman. And she does woodwork. I can't do woodwork. I can't work the saws, and I have to call her to teach me how to do it. And you know, I've got a bachelor's degree, so I don't. But yeah, that's how I call it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Thank you. Just to repeat the question, and I want to try my best. It's a little bit of a lengthy one. Yes, we're going to exclude Sonny. We're not going to say all, we're going to say experienced a little more than other panelists. But the question is, as you guys were speaking, there seems to be a relationship between labels, identity, and the space that you came from. But then the question that's being posed is like, do you think these identities or labels connect with the time, and have they changed throughout them? Have they evolved, and have you gotten rid of the ones that you don't feel are useful to you anymore? I think I cover everything. Let's go.
I personally love that question as a little bit of a history person, if you will, because I do think that space and time play a huge factor in what you identify as, and especially like, I think, I don't know the exact date when Latinx really emerged as a term, but I would venture to say that it, within the 2010s, the later era, that has now become a label. I also think that like Chicana and Chicano is very much so rooted in the political movement and the activism that took place, as Sonny mentioned. So time and space can't be separated from labels, and I think that they are definitely ever evolving. I'm sure there will be more to come, especially as new younger generations flourish in their lives.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to answer that question?
Yeah. So for me, again, I said that I've always, said that I was Mexican. I honestly didn't know about these terms until I took the class with my profesora, Introduction to Latino Studies. That's where I was introduced to all these new concepts such as, Chicano and Latinx. I was barely heard those words before, nor did I know the definitions of them. And so I'm happy to say that I've, explored these, and like, now that I know these definitions, I'm able to better connect with it. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else before we go to the next question?
I definitely think that the way I have identified has like changed over time as I've grown as a person and as I've had more experiences. I've definitely gone from using more like specific labels to using more like broad ones, like saying I'm mixed or just saying I'm Latina. And that's definitely changed over time, and I'm sure it will continue to change, especially as new labels emerge and as I find new ones that fit me better.
I will add a little tidbit. I do think that a lot of the kind of expanded labels have to do with a lot of the activism done by the queer community as well, especially in the later half of the 20th century. I mean, that's Latinx is gender inclusive. That's kind of the thing there. So I think that these labels are kind of built off of the backs of these people that do this incredibly hard work to make the supportive communities like we have here today. So have to recognize that aspect.
I think personally for me, at first when I got here, it was like, with first learning English, people mostly generalized me and my group of friends from Cedar, because I went to Cedar Ridge for elementary, and that's where I got my first set of friends, the with the Latinos. And so, usually I was just kind of bunched into the group of, he's Latino, he's Hispanic, or maybe even Mexican. And at the time, I didn't really mind it too much, because it's kind of difficult to just educate people. Some people just are very ignorant, and it's just like it's at a young age. At first, I was just like, that's too hard to teach them. But now that I've grown up and I recognize how important it is to be part of your identity, and especially where you come from. I've very much been very strong towards telling people that I am from Venezuela, specifically from Venezuela. Latinos works fine, but don't call me Mexican, like how they used to back in 5th grade. So, I've made that very clear, and it's gotten to the point where a lot of my really close friends, like, they stick up to me if somebody says that I'm not, like, if somebody calls me Mexican, they'll be like, no, he's Venezuelan, man, get it right. So, I feel like for me, it's more of as I've matured, I've realized to stick closer to where I'm from, so yeah.
Thank you. That was everyone but Sonny, just to remind everyone. Remember, right. But I think there's a lot of beauty and richness in the way that labels carry power and the way you guys talk about them and how they evolve. So thank you so much for those insights. Another question from the audience?
I want to thank you because I just really didn't anticipate that sort of the conversation would be so rich, right? And that each one of you have a story of your own, and I think that you really exemplify, right, what these labels are, which are they're very whimsical, they're historically, located, they're geographic, they're national, they're generational, they're racial, right? And so I love it because it's a great intro to Latinos studies must-see video, right? If we go with it, like, this is the future. And I think I have two questions. It really resonated for me the impact that school had over your lives, right? And at least all of you, right, went to school here in Bloomington Normal. And I wonder if any of you can kind of riff through what was it like to go to school in the 70s and the 80s when you were the only Latino, the only Chicano, versus maybe now where there's now a larger group of students that, where you have a sense of solidarity and I also want to maybe sort of think back about your schooling, if there were times in which you felt that you didn't see yourself in the reading, you didn't see yourself, in the materials that you were discussing, right? One thing is to go to school and just learn the, basics of school, but another thing is to have a sense of identity and a sense of community and history reflected at you, right? And I think that a completely different question, right? That's the education question, if you can hold your thoughts on that. One of the things that I wrestle with a lot is, where is home? And I guess that I want to ask you, especially since some of you have family in California, and in Texas, in Venezuela, Mexico, where is home?
Thank you for that. I think the questions keep getting longer. It's like a test of my memory, so we're going to go through it. Yeah, we're definitely going to nail it. So we have two questions that have been posed to our panel. The very first question actually resonates a lot with me because I'm also from this town, and I also went through Bloomington schools from high school all the way to grad school. But the question pretty much talks about, based on your different perspectives, how was your journey through the educational system in this town? Do you feel like there was representation showing, some kind of connection to who you are and your identity? Do you find solidarity, or do you find a sense of isolation? Being overwhelmed by a majority that did not look or represented who you are as an identity based on their conversation today. And I'm gonna actually pose that question first, and then we're gonna go to the second one. I got it right here, don't worry. But anyone who'd like to answer, go on.
I would like to start off. Going through high school, I had Spanish for 4 years. I had the same teacher for 3 of those, and then I had Miss Galvan for my 4th year. And there was enough heritage speakers, Spanish heritage speakers, where we had our own class. And we went through multiple countries through South and Central America. We were able to learn traditions, cultures, and learn about the different foods, and we even learned about like the Aztecs, the Mayans, everything. And I really love that because it's just like we celebrate those things to this day. I also, of course, I love the food days where we all would get assigned a country and we would bring food. We made the best, it wasn't perfect, but it was just nice including everyone because we're all not from, again, Mexico. We have people from Honduras, Guatemala, and so it's really eye-opening. And again, there's also those emotional groups. You just build relationship with professors and teachers where you trust them and you can talk to them. And so yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to answer that question?
Sonny, do you wanna?
Yeah, so my experience here in Bloomington Normal in the educational system was obviously traumatic. I'm not exactly sure if it was just, the home issues, single parent, growing up poor, and, being raised by, a strong, independent woman, but also being raised in violence. Because that is the way they were raised. And so even though it wasn't as extreme as what she experienced, it was still there and it was still present and it was part of the culture. But also just teachers, I remember, I wasn't the best student, I really wasn't. I was intelligent, I knew I was smart, but I had extreme social anxiety, low self-worth, and I went through a lot of trouble during my formative educational period. But one of the stories that I would just get in trouble all the time. I was a troublemaker and, had a lot of energy, didn't really know how to express myself, and just did boy stuff, I guess. We broke windows and, it was an accident, but, I was in the principal's office a lot. And I remember one conversation that stood out dramatically to me. I think I might have been 5th grade, 6th grade, maybe around that age. It was elementary school for sure. But I remember sitting in the principal's office, and he told me, he's like, "Sonny, you're a great kid, you're super nice, you're not book smart, but you'll be good with your hands," or something like that. And I remember that I've still not forgotten that to this day. And because I knew I was more than that. I knew that, I wanted to do better in school. I really did. My mother sacrificed a lot to send me to a private school. I went to a local Catholic school. And it was expensive. She worked her butt off. We didn't get assistance for, the first 8 years or something. First few years. I know there was a couple of years there where we did get help. But even as rough as it was growing up there, and I don't necessarily blame the school educational system. I think it was the culture back then. Because I read books about other people of color or other poor kids and how they were treated in the American educational system. But somehow I still managed to get an education, to overcome those obstacles that were placed on me by not having support that I needed at home. I was on my own. I was my mom couldn't help me. She sent me to private school because she's like, the nuns will teach you. It's their job. But the nuns weren't at home with me when I got home, and I was a latchkey kid, so I was just by myself watching MTV and struggling. A lot of my teachers, especially in high school, they would see how hard I tried. I would stay after school and get help. And sometimes I would get a C. Sometimes they'd just give me a D just because let's pass him along because he's trying, at least he's trying. And the whole time my mother was just always on my ass. You're going to college. I sacrificed a lot for you to get a good education. You're going to college. I did graduate high school. I did do that. And I took a year off. I wanted to work, so my mom was cool with that. But that year came up, she was like, financial aid papers right here. And so I went, and you know, I knew that if I wanted to be successful in school, if I wanted to make sure that my mom was proud of me, that I had to start reading. And I just started reading books. I would just be like, I'm gonna just read this one page today. And I just started out, 5 minutes a day, I'm gonna do that. And I started doing that. And eventually it built up and built up and built up. And now I'm the new book bike lady.
Yeah.
So, because I love books. And for those who don't know what the book bike is, it's this amazing program with the West Side Revitalization Project. Karen Schmidt started it, who used to be a local city council member, but she started it about a decade ago. And she has this bike, and she rides it around town, and it's full of books, and it's free. Free books for everybody in the community. And I started volunteering for that this summer, and it's like the best job I've ever had. We're at the farmer's market every Saturday, 9 to 11. But yeah, I mean, so I started reading, and it's like went to school, and from me picking up those books, I started to learn more about the world. I started to learn more about social injustice and organizing and activism, and that lit a fire under me. And I just started absorbing as much as I could about social justice and, you know, just what's happening in the world, mainly history, but then also how to get involved and change things. And it was all through the education system that I had. Even though it was rough and I struggled, it was a solid foundation. It was still seeping through. And, you know, going to the private school, I went to public school in high school, and I messed around freshman, sophomore year, but junior year, I actually buckled down, and I got straight A's and B's in my junior and senior year, because I was just trying. I didn't believe in myself. Like I said, I didn't have any self-worth, so I was like, why try? But through the inspiration of my mother and her just basically just kicking me in the ass to go to school and get ready, and I buckled down, and, you know, got a bachelor's degree. It took me 14 years. I mean, I worked full-time, went to school part-time, had a family. I graduated from Illinois State University when I was 34 years old, class of 2007, go Redbirds. But, you know, education, reading books I love it. I mean, I'm a big nerd, and I encourage everybody to read more books. But, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to answer this question? Or we can move on to the second one. I haven't forgotten, so we still have a second question waiting. Okay. Well, would you like to say something?
If I get going on the whole public school system, we'll be here all night. I think that I like how Sonny kind of concluded it, and the power of taking education into your own hands. I think that school and the way that it exists, specifically here in Bloomington too, I went through all the public schools, is important because it does provide a lot of access to a lot of people. It also, though, does construct an environment that is very regulated and is not always, you know, conducive for everyone's personal preferences. I am a very fidgety person, and I would always get in trouble for wanting to get out of my desk and different things like that. Although I enjoyed school and all of that to say, I'm very grateful for my teachers. But I think that the real power of education often lies in the outside resources, because school, an environment of young people together can sometimes be wonderful and can sometimes be something else, especially in the age of social media and when you have TV and going up from that structured environment out into the world. So yeah, we'll move on because I could ramble on that for a while.
Thank you, though. Okay, let's move to our second question. As we talk about labels and identities and your own journeys and paths and how you've evolved and grown, where do you consider home to be for you? What would you call that place of belonging and the place of connection in that initial sense for home?
Not to hog the mic, but I very literally consider Bloomington Normal to be my home in a term of place. I also think home is very much so a feeling. I think it's often, for me, surrounded by family. I think home is many things, but home is definitely here.
I think home is more of like an emotional sense of being with the people you care about. And it's definitely been hard, like going to college and a lot of my friends like going to different places, but my family is still here and I was still raised here. And I still have a lot of people I care about, so I would say I still consider Bloomington to be home.
For me, in my definition of home is just wherever my family and wherever I feel the safest. And well, for my entire life, it's been the house I live in or the apartment I'm living in. But it's definitely, it's a very metaphorical thing. It's not exactly like, it doesn't have a strict definition. It depends on the person. So yeah.
So for me, granted, I have a lot of family in Mexico and California. I don't see my grandmas nor grandparents, both sets. But I still consider this my home, mostly because I do have my cousins here, but it's where I was raised, and I've built relationships, friendships. I see some friends as brothers, sisters, and I wouldn't change any of that. I'm happy that I feel safe here, that I went to school here, that I'm continuing my higher education here. And so, yeah, I think it's always going to be home.
Yeah, family. I mean, wherever my family's at, I mean, that's where home is at.
Thank you for that. And I can agree in that sense. I mean, home for me is family, especially being of both dual backgrounds for myself, Mexican and French, whatever my family said, the people that I've chosen to be my family, especially my dad who lives in this town, that's where I feel home. We have time for one more question before we close. Oh, there we go. Thank you. To repeat the question, as you guys were growing up, going through your own journeys, do you see any kind of representation, literature or media that could help you connect with your identity? And if you didn't, do you think that would have made a change had it been present?
I think growing up in the age of social media, it's been a lot easier to find people like me because you can connect with other people and their personal stories over the internet. But in terms of media, and especially literature and in school, mostly there's a sort of lack of diversity and representation, especially in like my English classes growing up a lot of the time. That was especially troublesome, but media like television has gotten a lot more diverse, and there's definitely more representation there, I think, than there used to be.
I similarly think that, I'm kind of a cusper, so part of my childhood social media didn't exist, and then it really kind of came into play at the worst possible time for me personally in junior high, early high school. So I think I have witnessed an interesting shift in what media we consume on an individual basis, and I do think that media creates much of what is around us. I think that I will also add, before I go on my whole tangent of how much media impacts us, I studied mass communications in college, so I'm very passionate about media culture. But it literally impacts so much around us every single day, from like the ads that you see in the morning, kind of when you first wake up and scroll like through your phone, through the television shows in the background, and just the images that are all around us that are constantly inundating us, whether you're consciously absorbing it or not. It forms what you begin to think as acceptable, not acceptable, and everything in between. I mean, I've never fully seen myself in media. I've seen pieces of myself in different media, and I think that that's helpful in many ways. I don't know if I'll ever see exactly me represented in the media, and I don't necessarily feel a need to, but I think when you can connect with pieces of yourself out there. I think that that is really, really impactful, and it gives me a lot of hope to see expanding diversity represented in many different forms of media.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to answer that question?
I have some comments, if you guys. All right, so yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot in the 70s. I remember Chico and the Kid. I remember watching that. I remember watching the Freddie Prinze stand-up stuff that was happening. But I mean, outside of that, I mean, in the 80s, there were some films that were coming out, you know, it was like the gangster stuff. So it was like Blood In, Blood Out, the Zusu Riots, American Me. And that kind of deeply influenced, you know, what I was into and what I was thinking as far as like what a Latino is. I mean, because you're right, we do have the finest, most well-oiled propaganda machine in the history of the world, and it's doing its job effectively. So, I mean, combating that was just reading literature and actually like learning about art. I mean, for me, it was actually a Latino hip-hop artist, Kid Frost, who kind of helped me become more conscious of like, you know, gang war and like poverty and, you know, how poverty leads to the violence that's happening in, you know, in our major metropolitan areas, and, you know, how we could stop it in unity. There's this one song, like, if we just all come together, they can't stop us. And talking about, you know, talking to our brothers and be like, let's stop killing each other. Let's come together and get this political power and help our families. And that was like early 90s. I was, you know, 19, 20, around that age, and it was just like, that awakened me. Music awakened me. Rage Against the Machine in particular, who Zach de la Rocha is the lead singer. In their second album, they have, it's called Evil Empire. In their liner notes, they have a reading list. And I just started reading all the books. And so there's bits and pieces all that are throughout history, but you just gotta find them. And, you know, a lot of people don't, and they should.
Thank you. Okay.
I would say that as being, I would assume, the youngest person on this panel, social media's been around pretty much my entire life, or as long as I can remember. You know, at the beginning I remember, you know, Facebook and Twitter being mentioned a lot, and then when I moved here, it was more Instagram and, you know, the age of TikTok and the spying, you know, your phone's listening to you and all that kind of stuff. But definitely, I've been a little more connected with the Venezuelan culture. One of the first couple, you know, when I first discovered YouTube, back in the day, this is gonna sound a little silly, but, you know, a lot of the YouTube videos I would watch would just be, you know, Venezuelan soccer matches, you know, highlights for that, and that would be like my main connection with Venezuela, and also baseball, because, you know, those are my two favorite sports. So I feel like I've been fairly exposed to, you know, some Venezuelan culture through social media, and yeah.
Thank you. Will say something, or?
I mean, I might as well. Everyone else went. Yeah, I felt like I did see myself through social media, you know, negative stereotypes too. But, you know, I don't know. It's just like I've always, you know, always trying to see the good and, you know, be the best person I can be, and, you know, I mean, like sacar la raza adelante, and, you know, always, you know, work hard for what my mom worked hard for. You know, my mom worked, you know, both jobs, 2 jobs, and still is. And I'm currently still working. I'm working 2 jobs right now, being a full-time college student, and it's just, you know, graduating college is going to be the biggest thing. It's like it's on the top tier of my bucket list, and I can't wait for it. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can we get a round of applause for our panelists? You know, for everyone out there in the audience or watching the live stream, it's important to notice that it takes a lot of bravery to sit in a panel and, you know, share your story, your experience, and all the things that compose your identity. So let's be really proud of our panelists for what they're doing today for us, for our knowledge, and for our own celebration of the Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month. So I, for one, I am very grateful to hear your stories and to just have this amazing discussion about it. Now, being mindful of the time as we get closer to, well, we're closing the event, I want to have a couple of announcements to talk about. Number one, let's remember to thank all the sponsors that we have, which is WGLT, the radio station, McLean County Museum of History, Illinois State University, Illinois Wesleyan University, Normal Community High School, and all the local community organizations that help the work that we do to make this big events can happen and come to our city. So thank you very much to everyone. Please be mindful that both Illinois State University and also McLean County Museum of History are going to have a series of events to bring culture and awareness to this month, the Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month, as we're celebrating, and also bring acknowledgement to this culture that is so rich and so beautiful. I want to thank everyone for your time and attention, for being here tonight, and one more time, one round of applause for everyone here. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.